very different start to any of my videos this in the car. I'm on the A1 North. We're heading to Misson Carr. September 25th. It seems a long time since I've been here. In fact, it's 3 weeks exactly since I last came to Misson Carr. I'm taking advantage this evening because for the next few days the weather's going to be rather wet and windy, and tonight isn't, so the conditions are set fair for a decent few hours trapping. We'll give it 2-3 hours minimum, see what turns up. Be nice if 1 or 2 migrant moths make an appearance. It's highly likely here. I expect this place to be quite good for migrants because this whole southern vista here at Misson Carr is completely open. It's just right to attract the moths to the point here at the gates where I think I'll be putting up the trap. I never know sometimes whenever I visit a site. I can't just turn up and plonk things down and get set up and running. Sometimes I have to think, and that hurts. Well, we're all set up and off and running, generators on and working fine, and the light has more or less warmed up now. And the rooks and the crows are all off to bed. Amazing how they all get up and go to roost at the same time, all of a sudden. So it'll be interesting to see what and how much of what turns up this evening. It's a decent temperature. It's not forecasted to go down much below 15 and 14 perhaps, I don't think, by the end of the night. But I may well need the jumper for the first time this autumn. I've got it, but hopefully I'll try and man it out and not need to use it. There isn't a breath of wind, which is good. So we'll see what turns up. A moth has just flown past, small looking noctuid. So we should get a decent selection of the autumn moths by now. Say it is 3 weeks since I last trapped here. But a lot of the autumn moths, from what I've seen, at least earlier in September, seem to be in short supply. So we'll see what happens and what occurs and what comes in. Well, the sky's starting to dark now and the moths are starting to come in. There's a decent selection at the moment. But here's the first one we'll look at and I'll show you. And this is a sallow. This is quite untypically marked in a lot of the sallows that I've seen. There's usually some more elements of darker markings on the wings, but this one is relatively plain. Although when you look at the coloration making up the background colour of this moth, you'll see that there's various sort of markings and reticulations. It's still a beautiful species and quite typical probably of what's going to turn up this evening. So this is a common moth. You'll get it in your urban or suburban traps, and one to look out for any time now. And here is the typical form of green brindled crescent. It is an absolutely beautiful moth, one that doesn't show up its beauty under the light of a mercury vapour light, but it's a common moth, and this looks as though it's going to be one of the commonest noctuids around this evening. There's a third one just landed on the sheet. This occurs in 2 forms, and if I can I'll try and illustrate both of those 2 forms, but it is a truly beautiful moth, this, when photographed in daylight. Typically very common in wooded areas and more rural areas, but it will turn up in suburban gardens. I've had this at home. It's yet another example of how beautiful moths can be. They might not be all the bright, gaudy colours of butterflies, but their beauty is far more subtle and, to me, often more beautiful than many butterflies. So that's green brindled crescent, now being mobbed briefly by a sallow. Well, here's a very familiar moth to this channel, especially if you watch the trapping videos that occur late in the year and very early in a year. This moth will feature usually quite heavily, not always in such pristine condition as this, but this is a chestnut. Quite easy to determine really, because chestnuts always have that very glossy sheen to the wings, especially when fresh. This one has little in the way of noticeable markings apart from the dot or circular, a darker circle in the centre of the wings. Very soon, after feeding up for a few weeks, this moth will pass the winter tucked away in leaf litter on the forest floor. So that's the chestnut, and a moth that we'll probably see several times during the next few trapping sessions. 8:10. I'm doing quite well, actually. We're on to about 10 species, which doesn't sound a lot. Something else comes in there, but some nice moths in that 10 species, including this moth in here. It's a moth I haven't trapped for a long time. I've not had it at home, which I had, but this is a pale pinion, and it's a species that has quite a story, a personal story, and is of relevance to myself and to Dillis. It was back, I think, in 2005 when Dillis came out moth trapping with me for the very first time. Never been moth trapping, never had an interest in moth trapping. I gave her a net while I was sat around the light, and it was in the middle of Lown Wood at Eakin, I always remember it, and I saw her swipe at this moth. The moth turned out to be pale pinion, and it was a first for Nottinghamshire. Quite remarkable that the very first moth that is ever caught was a new species for Nottinghamshire. We ended up trapping it several times over subsequent years, but I haven't seen pale pinion for a good number of years now, to be honest. I can't remember the last time I trapped one. It might have been in Sherwood Forest. So that's nice to see. On the colourful side, if I can film one of these, I will. But this is a barred sallow, and this is another one of our sort of gold and pink autumn moths of the sallows range. A quite beautiful species. This one is smaller than sallow and sort of broader as well, almost different proportions to sallow, but I'll put the photo in anyway because it truly is an absolute stonker of a moth, a beautiful moth. Autumn is a really good time to get into mothing. It might be starting to cool down on a night time, but any effort that you do put in to trap your moths in autumn is often very well rewarded by some of our more colourful species. So we'll see what the next hour brings. Well, a very pleasant evening it is too. Pitch black. I can't see a light apart from a power station right over in the Trent Valley, a number of miles away, and a hazy moon. No light from either farm to my left or to my right. I like the solitude of Misson. I do. I love the run here. I enjoy trapping here immensely, and I love the run back. It's nice just to have a good few hours trapping moths, something that I enjoy immensely, and then to have a very pleasant ride back back through via the A1 and then pick up Clumber Park and drive through Clumber Park and come up by Carberton and the lakes. It's a lovely run back. I find that relaxing. And it's relaxing here. A decent enough species list. Nice that Pale Pinion has put in an appearance. I'm pleased with that and not surprised that that's turned up. I would like to trap Tawny Pinion one day. That's a moth that I've seen in photograph, but never actually trapped one. And there are a good range of species which can be trapped in autumn. As one decides to come in from over the gate now, or at least it's thinking about coming in over the gate. And somewhere I've got a cup of tea. It's not that on the bonnet of the car that you can see lower right of your picture. That's a cup with a hornet in it. If ever there's a downside to moth trapping during the autumn months, I suppose these ladies are it. These are European hornets. I like hornets and I like wasps, but I have great respect for these ladies, and to be honest, you don't want them flying around at the light. They do tend to take a while to settle down, but once they've settled down, they're very nice. But I prefer to pop mine up. That way I know exactly where they are, and I will be releasing these and any more that happen to flop in at the end of the session, right at the point where I'm leaving. But apart from hornets, the only other downside really, I suppose, are the temperatures, the cooler nights. You get the odd night that is pleasantly warm. And of course, the number of moths that you'll catch or attract to your light are also going to drop. They're going to be nothing compared to what you had in sort of June, July and early August, which is a good thing if you're new to moth trapping or thinking of divulging in some moth trapping. Autumn is a great time to start, in my opinion, as is the very early spring period. But if you're going to trap late autumn, early spring, you really need to get out to your local woodland or some decent habitat. While you can trap moths from the comfort of your own garden, species variety and numbers will be extremely low, in my experience anyway. But the number of moths that there are on the wing makes identification easier. There are a number of online resources available to get your moths identified, and it's nice if you try from the very onset to try and identify the species that you catch. And if you are asking people for an identification, having had a go yourself, even if it's completely out, is, well, will be appreciated by those who are going to provide you with the correct identification. And so trapping from late September onwards into November can be quite good for those new to the hobby, and then trapping again from late February onwards, depending on the spring, is also a good time. You're not dealing with vast numbers of moths. If you're not new to this channel, you'll have seen what this sheet here at Misson Carr is like at peak times of the year, and that's something that can put the newcomer off to the hobby. Not a very active sheet. Even if you like caddisflies, there's not a great species range on. And I've had 5 micro moths so far this evening. 3 Blastobasis lacticolella, which isn't the most exciting of moths. I may well drop a photograph in for you to show you exactly why it isn't the most exciting of moths. There's an Epinosia nicella and an Agonopteryx arenella. Extremely quiet. There is a slight breeze, which is probably taking the edge off the temperatures, but many moths will probably still be feeding and pairing at the moment. And that's why often your better moths or more moths will come in after at least an hour or 2 hours, and then they will start to appear. But one thing I would like to do at some time is to visit some flowering ivy on an evening. It can be very, very good apparently for moths, as good for moths on an evening and on a night time as it can be for red admiral butterflies and commoners during the day. It's something I've never done. Maybe one night very soon I'll do that. Sometimes it pays to look away from the light, to look at the nearby foliage or fence posts, tree trunks and fences, because quite often moths will come towards the light but not come actually to the light, and sometimes you can pick up some nice species along the way. And this represents the 20th species of the evening so far, and this is a pink barred sallow, beautiful golden yellow as you can see to the ground colour of the forewings, and then a range of blotches and spots on those forewings. And those blotches tend to be a more sort of brownish colour rather than pink, but the whole coloration goes to create a quite beautiful moth, and one of our most beautiful of autumn moths. It's reasonably common. You'll get this probably at home. It'll turn up. It doesn't seem to be around at the moment in numbers here in Nottinghamshire, based on trapping experiences I've had locally, but it's a typical species of what you can expect to get. So this is a pink barred sallow that was tucked away about 10 metres away from the light, just sitting here minding its own business, and what a cracking thing it is. Beautiful, isn't it? Well, it remains quiet. Temperature is 13 centigrade when I last looked about 5-10 minutes ago, so a good temperature for this time of the year, but not that many moths. Once again, I know I've mentioned this many times really this year, it's poor for micro moths, very poor. I've just had a Cleris rhombana, which is a rhomboid tortrix, I think the often used common name for it is, but that's the only sort of micro that's come in the last sort of hour or so. There's 5 or 6 blastobasis lacticolellas in now, but very poor for micro moths. Here's another noctuid thinking of coming down to the light. I do worry about the status of many species of micro moths. All thoughts seem to be given towards the larger moths, the macro moths, but the micros, those smaller moths, they seem to have really been hit hard by the weather, probably this year and last year as well combined. Hopefully they'll make something of a comeback in the next few years, but it's been very, very poor for micro moths, and that's not just numbers but range of species. There's a lot of species that I would have expected to have turned up at the trapping sessions that I've done this year but haven't, and that's a worrying sign. So if you're thinking about moths and the decline of moths, think even more about the decline in micro moths currently. Earlier this evening, not long after I'd switched the light on and it was starting to get dark, I hadn't had a moth to the light, and all of a sudden from over the gates came a beetle, a large beetle. It flew slowly, far slower than most large beetles that I've seen fly. I had my suspicions. I worked out, well, it's too late for cockchafer. I think it's too late for lesser stag beetle. This seemed larger, but it went over the car and appeared to be dropping down. I looked for it with the torch, to no success. Then, probably over an hour ago, something very similar went by in the opposite direction from the car down to behind the gates. I've just been sat by the light, intending to catch the latest hornet that's come in, and I can see the species that flew over, the beetle that flew over. It's a beetle that I waited a lifetime to see. I had hoped that possibly I could get this beetle here, but I thought it might be with netting, although I did hope that on one of those really humid nights when water beetles, and there's a clue, fly into the light, I might get it. I didn't, but I have now. I'm going to show you what it is. This has got me really excited. I'm looking forward to tomorrow now, because I wanted to photograph one of these things always, and certainly in the 26 or so years since I've had the website and developed an interest in beetles, this one has been on the top of my list. And it's not in here, it's sat on the sheet. I don't know how long it's been there, but my feeling is that it's come down and crawled through the grass, and it is a great diving beetle. And this is it, Disticus marginalis, a great diving beetle. How I've longed to see one of these, and never did I think that tonight I would get to see one. I didn't think it was water beetle flying weather, but this is undoubtedly the beetle, or the species, that flew over earlier on twice, and this one is being potted up and is going home. These are large, grubby finger time. These are one of the big predators of our ponds and slow-moving bodies of well-vegetated water. I can't believe I'm looking at one, to be honest. I really can't. And I'll get you another angle so you can appreciate it as much as I can. This is probably very recently hatched. The larvae are aquatic. I'd love to find one of these as a larva. They're very large and they eat lots of things. Nothing's pretty much safe. Even young newts will be taken and by the larva of Disticus marginalis. Fabulous. I've had a tank on the wall of on the yard, and that's been set up. I've used it many times over the years to photograph water beetles, in the hope that one day one of these would grace that tank. Now, I go on quite a lot about how colourful our autumn moths are, and indeed many species are beautifully coloured, as you've seen tonight. Here's an exception, but despite this black rustic being completely black to all degrees, it is an extremely beautiful moth. The forewings may not look well patterned and just black, but they are quite intricately patterned. It just doesn't show up very well on this moth, and the only discernible markings is where the kidney mark on each forewing is partially edged in greyish white. It's a very attractive moth. I do love black rustics, but black is one of my favourite colours anyway. And this is a typical moth of autumn trapping, found in September and October, and a nice, attractive, despite being black, moth. So that's black rustic, just the one in tonight. I would have expected a couple more, but this is always a nice moth to see, and it's one that you will get if you're trapping suburban and even urban areas. Well, it's 22:50, which means that if I stay for 4 hours, that'll take us till 23:15, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give it another 20 minutes. I'm going to pour myself another cup of tea and see if anything else starts to come in. Of course, you can keep staying later and later. You're almost certainly going to get something interesting coming, and so we'll see. Overall, I suppose it's been fairly quiet. There's been some lovely moths. That hopeful rare species hasn't turned up, at least not in moth form anyway. It has in coleoptera form with great diving beetle. So that is a big reward for me personally. Many people watching this will have thought, well, I'd have thought I'd have seen great diving beetle before now, but I haven't got webbed feet, and I haven't spent lots of time pond dipping. Always thought that one day one would drop into light, and tonight has been such a night. I wouldn't have expected it late September though. So we'll see what happens, what occurs in the next 20 minutes. See if anything else drops in. Temperature is now 12 centigrade, so still plenty warm enough. Just a case now, cup of tea, maybe pack a few things away, in the hope that, as a general rule, actually, if you start to pack up, all of a sudden something drops in that makes you want to stay that little bit longer. So it all depends on the next 20 minutes. Well, it's 23:15, nothing else has come in, not a moth of any kind has come in. So I think it's time to switch off the generator, pack things up and head off home.